Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns 24/7, joined as always by our fearless leader, the managing editor of Horns 24/7, the one and only Taylor Estes. Taylor, we are coming off of an off week, and who'd have thunk at the beginning of this season that the Texas Longhorns would be an underdog going to face a Baylor program that went 2-7 last year in the first year under Coach Dave Aranda.
I would not be one who would have thought that, Chip. No chance. This was, as we've talked about a lot, the gauntlet part of the schedule we expected to kind of end after the Oklahoma State game before Texas bye week, but that is clearly not the case. I mean, there's still a lot of good teams on the Big 12 schedule left for Texas, so not an ideal situation, especially entering this game coming off of back-to-back losses to conference opponents.
Yeah, and when last we were talking to everybody here on the Flagship podcast, Steve Sarkisian wanted to work on the psyche of his team and help his players finish games better because they had leads of 28-7 and 41-23 late in the third quarter against Oklahoma before losing that game, and then had a chance to go up and build on a 17-3 lead against Oklahoma State and led that game by double digits in the third quarter before completely getting outplayed in the fourth quarter. And so not only back-to-back losses, but back-to-back losses where they give up a double-digit lead. And I asked Casey Thompson today, are we even talking about these mental hurdles that this team has to get over if they were in back and forth close games throughout the game with Oklahoma and Oklahoma State and not, having had jumped out to these big leads where players could get comfortable or start to think, well, we're good. And then start thinking, well, someone else will make the play and have all these things. I mean, Steve Sarkisian had this team watch the documentary Free Solo about the climber Alex Honnold, who scaled the 3,200-foot rock face of El Capitan in Yosemite National Park without ropes, without any protective harness, to point out that if you just stay focused on each step of the process and not think about the consequences of that step in the process, we'll be fine. We, basically Sark was saying, we start thinking about the result, or we start thinking about the scoreboard, or we start thinking about the point in the game instead of just nailing the next play.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's this, it sounds goofy to hear that a football coach of a big time program was, showing his players a documentary on rock climbing, but maybe it'll help, Taylor.
I mean, you would hope it would. That's it is an interesting documentary of choice. Obviously, it's not as life or death in this instance, if Texas does not, keep to its focus or anything like that, as it would be for a rock climber. But it is an interesting analogy. I mean, Steve Sarkisian, I think it's very clear that, and I don't think anybody who has watched Texas this year is questioning if Texas is, a competent football team. The question is, Texas cannot finish football games, and they get out to these big leads, and as we've mentioned, the double digit leads late in the game against both Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. I mean, clearly those are quality football programs. I mean, Oklahoma is still a top 4 team in the country right now and has a chance to play for another college football playoff game, like they have a lot under Lincoln Riley and a lot since the start of the college football playoff era. So it's not like they're losing or, letting teams like a Kansas, no offense to Kansas, but a Kansas come back on them like that. So, when you look at this Texas team, Chip, it's not really about the ability to play a game. It's about the ability to finish a game. So it makes sense, to use analogies at this point, especially during the bye week, It's going to be interesting to see how the players take to it, though, because as we've talked about a lot, I think there's a lot of the here we go again mentality on this team. And that's not something you can easily shake in 1 year, or one coaching staff can shake within 7 games. I mean, if it's ingrained in your mental state, it's going to be very difficult to erase that from there. So they have to do it. Obviously, looking at the rest of the schedule of Big 12 play is not going to be, just coasting on through the final 5 games of the season. But definitely an interesting analogy to use, the rock climbing thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you look at Baylor. They're the 16th ranked team now. They were off last week, just like Texas, but went from 20 to 16 because teams like Penn State lost to Illinois, and there was movement in the rankings. And so Baylor goes up, and Baylor opened as a 3-point favorite against Texas. And Keandre Coburn, the senior nose tackle, said, I like being the underdog. Takes the stress off us. But I mean, these are back-to-back road games at Baylor, at Iowa State, with the direction of Texas's season in the balance. You win these 2 games, you've got real momentum. You split these 2 games, and fans are going to probably feel like they're falling off that rock face that Alex Honnold scaled in the documentary Free Solo, which, by the way, is a great documentary. Recommend it to everyone.
Have you watched it?
I have.
Oh,
I've
okay,
watched
interesting.
it twice because I couldn't believe what I just saw. It's one of those.
Okay.
This guy is from another planet. Is I mean, the camera crew that filmed this thing, those guys are daredevils as well. But you look at this situation, and obviously Iowa State's now back in the rankings after beating Oklahoma State this past weekend. So Texas is going on the road to face ranked opponents the next 2 weeks. And as most coaches would say, it's a great opportunity for this team to show what it can do and, put together some real momentum. But it's also a test of where this team is and the direction of its season. So, um, you know, Steve Sarkisian has, to a player today, the players said it's not that we don't understand the schemes. It's not physical. It is mental, that guys relaxed and they have to take it upon themselves. I thought Casey Thompson said it best. We have to, um, look, not, we have to seize the moment, not shy away from the moment. And every player has to do it. So it's going to be a great test of coaching Steve Sarkisian, this staff's ability to get this team, focused and able to play 60 minutes of football. We've seen it
Yeah.
at times, but haven't seen it in a minute.
Right. Yeah, you haven't. And one thing, Chip, hearing Steve Sarkisian talk on Monday, we're talking a lot about the players. And I want to make it clear he's not just blaming this all on the players in any way, shape, or form. He's been very forthtelling about, what the staff needs to do as well. And one thing I did like to hear him say was he talked about, later in games when the team's been kind of up and down, or had some down drives, that he may be kind of, I don't know exactly the words he used, but almost get a little bit too like
Safe.
too safe. Yes, exactly. Like he's not going to push the envelope, and he's kind of relying on things that he knows the offense has done well and can do well at pretty much any given moment. And he said that that's probably it's something that he needs to correct, and he's got to have more trust in the players to snap out of it a little bit more. But I liked hearing a coach say that, because I think that's a difficult thing for a coach, especially a play caller, to admit. I mean, Steve Sarkisian is known as a great offensive mind, obviously. And so to hear him say that, he may be impacting a little bit, I think that takes a lot of balls, I guess you can say, a little bit, to
For
admit
lack
to
of a
it.
better word.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, he didn't have to do that. He could have, gone to a coach speak answer. And I think that's, before people want to give up on on Steve Sarkisian, as a head coach. I know there's been a lot of, people not thrilled with the last two games, especially, and they kind of get jumping over the edge, coming on back-to-back losses, the way that they lost to Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. I do think there's been some people questioning if Steve Sarkisian's like the guy or something, and it's like that's why he needs the time, because he's able to admit to his faults, 7 games into the season, and really just own it that he's playing it safe a little bit too much, and he's got to have more trust. If the player's going to trust in him, he's got to trust in them too. And I thought that was really key. I thought that was one of the key takeaways from Steve Sarkisian. He talked about a lot of things they did over the bye week, talked about a lot of, the focus on the psyche of the team and, all of that. But from a head coach to be willing to admit that this early on in his career, especially at a place like Texas that has been quick to jump from coach to coach, I liked hearing him take ownership in that and admitting that, he could have been, some at fault for just the slowed performance down the stretch in games.
Yeah, that was actually his response to my question when I asked him about the adjustments to the adjustments that,
Mhm.
you go into every game anticipating adjustments from the other team, and then you have to adjust to their adjustments. And I said, how's your staff been in that? And he said, adequate.
Mhm.
And you're right. He said that I've probably defaulted to plays in the second half that I know we run well as opposed to more elaborate plays. And he said, looking back, we've run the elaborate plays pretty well. And I need to be more trusting of the players. And I agree with you. I think that's something we never would have heard from the previous regime. But, you know, the previous regime also played one possession games and were in every game and played physical and played tough. And so we can find flaws everywhere.
Right.
It's a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old kids trying to play one of the greatest team sports on the planet, and there are a lot of moving pieces. We get it, but look, fans at Texas have been starving since 2009, so they don't
Right.
care that Steve Sarkisian's been here 5 minutes. And look at Dave Aranda. I mean, we talked about this a little bit and need to talk about it more, and we'll talk about it with David Smoke in our preview later this week for the Baylor game. But Dave Aranda hires Larry Fedora, has one of the worst offenses in college football last year. I mean, one of the worst. They averaged 2 yards per carry.
Yeah.
That's how bad they were. And now, he lets go of Larry Fedora. He brings in Jeff Grimes from BYU, and they're the leading rushing team in the Big 12. Better than OU, better than Oklahoma State, Iowa State with Brees Hall, Baylor, and Baylor beat Iowa State, remember.
Right.
So that's you got to give these coaches some time because they're figuring things out. It's not all their players. We get it. Everybody's already looking through the transfer portal for offensive linemen. I mean, Texas fans are.
Yeah.
Uh, and I
And we get it. And we get that,
we
obviously.
we get it. We
Yeah.
get that. And look, we can look at the replays of the games too and see where players, are and aren't making plays. But Steve Sarkisian's got to fix what he's got. And Saturday at 11 a.m. in Waco as underdogs. And again, before the season, I thought Baylor was a shipwreck.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't think Dave Aranda, obviously he got the offensive coordinator hire wrong the first time, but wow, what a home run on the second go around. And we know Dave Aranda can coach defense, and he got one of his LSU players to transfer, their nose tackle, who's 6'4", 350 pounds. I'm going to totally mess up this guy's name, but it's Siaki Apuiku. Siaki Apuiku. He's 6'4", 350, and he messes everything up
Mhm.
On defense for the opposing offense. So just know number 62 is the LSU transfer that Dave Aranda got to come to Waco and anchor that defensive line. And yeah, they still have Terrell Bernard, and they're playing good defense. So, Taylor, I liked what Casey Thompson said about embracing the moment instead of shying away from it. They still do have to replace Jordan Whittington and those catches over the middle. And
Mhm.
I know that Xavier Worthy and Joshua Moore can get off press coverage, and they got quickness and that kind of thing, but they got to show that they can go over the middle like Jordan Whittington did. Jordan Whittington was 6'1", is 6'1", 203 pounds. And Josh Moore and Xavier Worthy are 6'1", 160,
Mhm.
maybe 165. And that's a mindset. And so that's something that I'm really looking at this week for this offense to continue. Because remember, Jordan Whittington, 11 of his 24 catches were on third down. They've got to find that security blanket for Casey Thompson on third down. Is it one of those receivers I just mentioned? Is it the tight ends? Is it Bijan Robinson? But someone's going to have to go over the middle and make those tough catches. And that's something they should have been able to establish in the off week with 2 weeks.
Yeah, you would hope so, if you're a Texas fan. And Steve Sarkisian was asked, kind of about the receiver group. And he said that the numbers are going to get called differently with the receivers right now. So there's going to be, more opportunities there for guys with, Jordan Whittington still out of the mix in the receiver group. I think the question was, is this basically just Josh Moore, Xavier Worthy, or what? And that's where he was talking about this. And he said right now they're just looking for more consistency, even with the two guys that are the one and two guys with Xavier Worthy and Joshua Moore. But then he also did say it's been a bit of an up and down roller coaster in the passing game too. And so I think that's something, Casey quarterbacks get a lot more credit than they deserve. A lot of times they get a lot more blame than they deserve a lot of times. So I'm going to preface this by saying that. But he's got to be better too. I think, it's the receivers have to help him out. Obviously, if there's a ball in the vicinity or if the ball touches your hands, you've got to catch it, because especially if you're a Xavier Worthy or a Joshua Moore right now, when you are the two leading receivers that the team has available, and they don't have Jordan Whittington, who has been, clutch, especially on third downs. So obviously the guys need to make the plays when the plays are there, but Casey Thompson has to do better. And you've seen him fall off later in games. I know the Oklahoma State game, I'm not he struggled, a lot, but he had a lot of pressure in his face too. So there's a lot of moving factors when it comes to when a quarterback starts to struggle. But, I think right now, Chip, this is a very defining moment for him, as well as not just the team and the offense overall, but for him, because he is entering this game, with up and down performances starting back at the TCU game. And so I think that Casey Thompson definitely has a lot to prove. And I think he has gained a lot of benefit of the doubt as well. I would be surprised if he comes out against Baylor and struggles, but if he does come out against Baylor and struggles, then we may be having a different conversation after that game about if he is the guy to lead them down the stretch in the later part of the season. I think right now he still is, but I think a struggling performance against Baylor may change that. And I'm curious for your take on the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think the worst thing that happened in the Oklahoma State game was that Casey Thompson was part of the problem and not part of the solution. Because even against TCU, when he was 1 of 5 on third down, he converted 2 third downs with his legs and then threw the 32-yard touchdown pass to Jordan Whittington to go up 12
Right.
in the fourth quarter. And so he overcame adversity and was part of the solution. Against OU, he played heroic. I mean, 5
Hmm.
touchdowns, no turnovers, led that touchdown drive with 1:23 left. But against Oklahoma State, the pick six and then the late interception where he, tried to loft it over the defender and didn't get it there. Those were 2 interceptions that were backbreakers. The pick six changed the game. There's no question. You're at the Oklahoma State 18-yard line. You're going to get points, you would think, at least a field
Right.
goal to go up 20-3, if not 24-3. And then it's boom,
Right.
and look, we've seen Texas quarterbacks throw pick sixes in the past in their developmental stage. Um, Sam Ellinger, Chris Sims, and you have to overcome it. Well, this is the game that we see if Casey Thompson can shake it off and be the guy on the road to make the plays that help get his team over the hump and not put them in a hole. And I think Casey going into the Oklahoma State game was right there for all Big 12 quarterback. Now Caleb Williams has played what, 3 games, and the guy's a Heisman front runner. And
Yeah.
last week he ripped the ball out of his running back's hands on 4th down and converted the 4th down. Everybody in the world's talking about it. He played like garbage in that
Yeah.
game, but by God, he made the play of the year.
Yeah,
And
the most
it's
heads up play you'll see, and he's a true freshman. Like,
we
oh
talked
my
about it
gosh.
at the Heisman ceremony. Exactly. Even
Yeah.
Casey Thompson, I asked him, I said, "Are you ready to rip the ball out of Bijan's hands if you have to?" And he's like, "I give Caleb Williams all the credit for in the moment making that play." And he said, I immediately thought, what would Coach Sark have thought if I did that? But
Depends on how it played out, if it was a
right,
good
if the
play.
ball gets
You
loose
take
and it's on the ground and it's a turnover, it's, "What were you thinking?"
Yeah,
But
exactly. It's like you stole the ball from the best players on the team's hands. But if
right,
it worked out, my gosh, it would be yeah.
right. So, it's a big moment for Casey Thompson because anytime you're the winner of a close quarterback battle, there's going to be, well, what about the other guy? What about the
Right.
other guy? Maybe Hudson Card's developed in practice in these 7 games. And I would say, I still think Casey Thompson shows the most poise in the pocket, and he has been hit 19 times in the last 2 games. That's too much. And
Way
he's
too
been
much, yeah.
sacked 16 times. I mean, he's standing in the pocket. I mean, he's not running out of the pocket when there's protection and getting sacked. He's in the pocket, and there needs to be better protection. And so we'll see. I mean, Steve Sarkisian brought it up again today. The competition has been good at left tackle for Christian Jones and Andre Carrick. Okay, what does that mean? How many snaps is Andre Carrick going to get this week at left tackle? He's talked about competition between Tope Amade and Hayden Connor, the freshman at right guard. Okay, how many snaps is Hayden Connor going to get? Because look, we're at that point of the season where if a guy's been in on the job for 7 games and he hasn't, proven or improved, then it is time to look at some younger guys. But the
If they're
problem
there.
is, right, if they're there, the
Mhm.
problem is you're going on the road
Mhm.
for the next 2 games, and coaches are afraid to play young players on the road because of what can happen
Right.
in a hostile environment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no question that, I think competition across the roster right now is the only thing that's going to improve this roster, but if there's not the guys there, then there's only so much you can do, I mean, um, I made the bad analogy last week, but and I don't mean it that they're this bad, but you can't make, chicken salad out of what. And I'm not saying that's what Texas has right now in any way, but in a sense, I mean, if there's no backups that you truly rely on, what can you do? That's when you have to have, the vocal leadership really step up. And, before we get to love it or leave it, Chip, one thing I wanted to touch on was, what Bijan Robinson said prior to the bye week that he wanted to work on his vocal leadership and in the bye week. And Steve Sarkisian was asked about that. And Sarkisian essentially said, when it comes to vocal leadership, obviously it's very key to have that on the team. However, it has to come from somebody who does everything right. And Bijan Robinson is that guy who does everything right. And so Sarkisian said, he does everything right on the field. He does everything right in his preparation. And then he does everything right off the field because he's an amazing person too. So if he develops that vocal leadership, people are going to listen to him, but he doesn't want it to be a focus for Bijan either if it's not, within a comfortable level. And that's where, having a lot of upperclassmen and veteran players comes in handy, right? If you do have that. Texas does have Roshan Johnson at running back who can be that. And he's, a very vocal leader. He does everything right, both on and off the field too. But it's not, a Bijan Robinson caliber of talent, which there's not much Bijan Robinson caliber of talent in college football in general. That's not a knock on anyone else. It's just he's that special. So, when it does come to leadership, I'm curious to see what, level of comfortability that Bijan Robinson does have to be a vocal leader, because he may be one of the only guys on the team that carries himself in a way that players are going to listen when he talks, because of everything he does that's right, both on and off the field.
Yeah, and they need more
Hmm.
player leadership, players holding each other accountable for mistakes. We talk about it all the time. Player-driven teams. When the players are coaching the players, that's when the magic happens. You've got to be a player-led team, and that's where the argument of, well, Sarkisian doesn't have his guys in here yet.
Hmm.
But we've seen some guys make plays, and they got to keep making the plays, and
Yeah.
that's what's look. They've got obstacles to overcome. The offensive line has been a work in progress, to say the least.
To put it
Um,
nicely, I think
to
it's the
put it
best way.
nicely, but
Yeah.
we've also seen Texas teams in the past with average offensive lines do very well. I mean, I hate. I'm sure the guys in the offensive line in 2009 are like sick of me,
Yeah.
but that was not a great offensive line. But the coaches rolled the pocket. They got Colt McCoy on bootlegs and waggles, and hid the flaws on their offensive line, um, and put Colt McCoy in position to make plays. He made them. He was special. His name's up in the stadium for a reason. But that's what good coaches do. They adjust. They change things up to feature their talent and hide the flaws, and that's what I'm expecting to see on Saturday against Baylor. And Taylor, before we get to love it or leave it, I will say that both Ovi Agofu and Keandre Coburn today mentioned linebacker Jalen Ford as a guy who's emerging, as a
Mhm.
guy who got the team's respect with his play against Oklahoma State. 12 tackles, team leading 12 tackles, had some hard hits, and so what does that mean? Well, he tends to come in with David Benda in a two-man platoon for Luke Brockermeyer, and DeMarvion Overshawn, who we reported in the Insider last week, is back and cleared from concussion protocol um, after suffering the concussion against Oklahoma State at the end of the first quarter. But um, so that's something to watch. Does that mean Jalen Ford's going to come in for Luke Brockermeyer and play with DeMarvion Overshawn, or do they continue to platoon those two linebackers in groups because of their chemistry and communication, familiarity with each other? Obviously, Jalen Ford and David Benda practiced together on the second team defense in practice. So he was a name that was brought up by those players. And when asked, anyone show you anything during the off week, both of those, Ovia Gofu, Keandre Coburn mentioned Jalen Ford. So we'll see what that means on Saturday. And look, it's going to be a good one, just like Love It or Leave It is always a good one on the Flagship podcast.
It is, Chip. Before we get to love it or leave it, we're going to take a really quick break, but stick around because football talk continues here on the Flagship podcast. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will continue rolling on here. Chip, you ready for some love it or leave it?
Let's go.
Alrighty, my first one for you is love it or leave it. Outside of offensive line, the position group that needs to pick it up the most this week is at safety.
I'm going to love this. And I'm going to love this because there have been plays and look, I understand BJ Foster has 2 interceptions and that leads the team, but there have been more plays for the safety to make, more plays on the ball, more plays coming up in run support. And those plays need to be made, and they need to be made with, this is a school that produced, Michael Griffin. And if you haven't listened to that interview on the Flagship podcast from last week. As soon as you're finished listening to this podcast, just click play on that one and listen to a guy who grew up from two military parents, who was a running back out of high school and became one of the best safeties in all of football, and what his standard is and for this defense and what he wants to see from his position. But more plays need to be made. Look, if you're not, DeMarvion Overshawn is electric at linebacker. He's sideline to sideline, but he's not strong. He's light. He's a former safety who had to battle through a shoulder injury and has struggled to get stronger. He had COVID the year before. Luke Brockermeyer is a sturdy, smart linebacker who knows where to be for the most part. And for the most part, gets there is part of the tackle. If he doesn't make the tackle, he slows the guy up enough for everyone to come in. But if you don't have lightning strength at linebacker across the board, your safeties have to be the cleanup. And I get it. Pete Kwiatkowski's been playing two high safeties. It's hard for safeties to be involved in the running game when they're 10, 15 yards off the ball.
Right.
This is something I'd like to see this week as well. Let's go single high safety, bring a safety down into the box, however you want to disguise it, and get those safeties more involved in the run defense. And I get it. Pete Kwiatkowski likes to keep everything in front of him and then, give up yards between the 20s and then give up not much or a field goal in the red zone. But they've got to be more aggressive, Taylor. Pete Kwiatkowski calls good blitzes.
Yes.
They've had success blitzing. They've forced turnovers on their blitzes. Trust that. Keep going with that. Stay aggressive. Keep your players thinking aggressive. So yes, I'm going to love this, Taylor. I'm going to say the safety position needs to pick it up. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to love it. And I think, honestly, Chip, a part of me wonders how much trust Pete Kwiatkowski does have in the safeties to make those plays. If he brings, one up into the box to help with run, support, and then he's leaving one guy basically on an island to be the one to stop it. Who's that guy? Who would you pick? I don't know who I would pick between BJ Foster and Brendan Schooler right now. And those are the two, that they have for the most part to work with. I mean, Jaron Thompson, he pretty much lost his role. So that's an issue in itself, but it doesn't matter. I mean, these are guys that were recruited to the University of Texas. They're not, like, no offense to this guy, it's not a Dylan Haynes situation, a former walk-on that all of a sudden is this, a 4-year starter at safety for Texas. That's not what Texas has at its disposal. They have guys that, were highly recruited guys coming out of high school. You look at BJ Foster, was a former 5-star. You look at Jaron Thompson, he was a high-rated 4-star. They haven't gotten the development, I think, that people expected them to be at. But still, when you have that type of kind of clout going in, you've got to play up to at least a standard of being consistent. And they're not playing that right now. And so, that needs to change, because the run defense, especially, I mean, it's one that people are going to keep testing until it shows that they can stop the run. And until, everybody really buys into stopping the run, teams are going to run on them. And they're, some of the most explosive plays have been run plays that Texas have given up this season. So, yeah, I think that safety has to do a much better job of helping the defense as a whole. And when the ball is coming at them, they have to make the play. And that's, I think, the most frustrating thing for a lot of people that watch this defense right now, is they're not making the play a lot of times when they're, in the vicinity to do so. And that's mainly the safeties. I feel like the corners do a pretty good job of making a play. And the corner, in my opinion, is probably the most difficult position to play aside from quarterback in football. I would say cornerback is probably the second most difficult. I mean, the skill set you have to have is very unique, and not too many people have it to play at an elite level. And Texas has guys that can't. So I do think the safeties are the, pretty much the middle of the defense a little bit. The safeties and linebacker position is a little bit of the weak link right now. But I would say safety needs to step it up, because you mentioned before the break talking about Jalen Ford. We talked about him coming in off the bench, and, he played better than I think a lot of people expected to replace a DeMarvion Overshawn, who has been, more of a leader on defense for this team. So, yeah, I totally agree. I think the safeties definitely need to step it up outside of offensive line, which we already pile on the offensive line enough. We don't even need to go into why that's number one. I don't think right now, but
Yeah, I mean, you think about, not just Michael Griffin, but Quandre Diggs, Kenny Vaccaro,
Mhm.
Adrian Phillips. And these are guys who developed into players who held everyone accountable. Kenny Vaccaro used to call out the quarterback. I mean, he he wasn't afraid to hold his peers to a higher standard and made the plays to back it up. And that's the kind of stuff you want to see from, Brennan Schooler, whose brother's a, hitting machine, tackling machine for Texas Tech. We'll get to Texas Tech and
Yeah.
them letting go of Matt Wells here in a second. But um, Brendan Schooler struggled a little bit against Texas Tech. You got to coach these guys up. I would have him be the single high. I'd have BJ Foster be the one down in the box. I still like the idea of Josh Thompson back there, but I think he was back at corner um, this week on Monday. And so, I you don't want to change everything because then
Right.
you can spring leaks elsewhere. But I agree with you. So let's see if that position can have more of an impact. How
Yeah.
about love it or leave it? Number two.
All right. Number two is Casey Thompson's job could be on the line this week with a poor performance at Baylor. Love it or leave it.
I'm going to leave this because I think Casey has done well in some tough spots. Like him getting hit more is not a good sign for Hudson Card, whose biggest problem was getting hit and then
Right.
taking his eyes off the receivers downfield and running out of the pocket, getting sacked,
Right.
and everything bogging down. I think Casey's the guy that needs to be coached up, certainly through these next two road games. And then if it's, if it's not working for three straight games, obviously Steve Sarkisian's got a big decision to make. I don't think it's this game,
Mhm.
but you never know. I mean, Casey's got to show that he can shake off that pick six and the other interception against Oklahoma State, knowing that that was a huge turning point in that loss, and bounce back and be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. I like his toughness. I like how he played with that jam thumb against OU and Oklahoma State. It's better now after the off week, but I think the players have bought in to him. I mean, I think they believe in him. So they've seen him deliver a clutch touchdown drive against TCU on the road and late in the OU game, even though that was a loss. So I don't think that his job is on the line in this Baylor game, but that's my opinion.
Mhm.
Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it. I mean, it would depend on how poor of a performance it would be. I mean, I think at this point, if the pass protection is a huge, question for Texas, which it's been basically all year, then Casey, as you mentioned, I think you're right. I think he's probably the better quarterback suited to play behind that offensive line because you go back to the Arkansas game. I mean, I remember watching that game and literally thinking to myself, like, with each play, we're watching Hudson Card lose all faith in the offensive line. And he made, freshman mistakes from there. Not trusting the protection when he did have it, which he didn't have it a lot, but there were times when he did have it and he still didn't trust the guys in front of him to protect him. And that's when he got kind of happy feet and tried to scramble outside the pocket. So I do think that if that continues to be an issue at the offensive line, then Casey Thompson's probably the better suited guy, especially with back-to-back road games. Now, if he goes out and has an absolutely terrible performance where the offense can't do anything, then it's a different question. I don't necessarily think that Texas wants to be in a situation where they're rotating quarterbacks or anything along those lines. I don't think that's something Steve Sarkisian would necessarily want to do. I don't think that's what any coach in the history of football would ever want to do. They've had to do it sometimes, but they don't really want to do that. So, um, you know, unless it's something that is just a mind-numbingly terrible performance, no, I don't think his job should be on the line with a poor performance against Baylor this week. Now, but again, as you mentioned, if it goes back to back to back games, especially with a bye week in between, then Steve Sarkisian has to probably make a change because it's not getting better. And as we always talk about, the signs of a well coached and a good team is week to week improvement. And if the person who touches the ball on every snap on offense is declining and not progressing in any way or doesn't show signs of any production or progression, then you have to make a tough coaching move, and that's probably where Steve Sarkisian would be if that's the case. I just don't necessarily think right now that it's time to give up on Casey Thompson because sure, he's been up and down in some games, but when he's been on, he's really on. And I think that when he has, trust in himself and doesn't let his mind take over his play, then I think he's a really solid quarterback for Texas and for this offense. But he's got to show, he definitely has to show progress. And that's where that's why I wanted to ask you before the break about your, assessment kind of on the quarterback right now, because it is a little bit of a turning point. I think this can go one way or the other, and it's going to be on, Casey Thompson to really secure the job in these next two games. But I just think it would be too early to throw in the towel on him if, Texas were to go on the road at Baylor and lose that game. Now, if they go on the road at Iowa State and lose too, then we're talking about something different.
Yeah.
So yeah, agree and leave it.
This whole team needs to show a whole bunch of urgency on Saturday at 11 in Waco. All right,
And keep
Taylor.
it for 60 minutes of the freaking game
Yeah,
clock.
right. And keep it for the rest of the season.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
okay, how about love it or leave it, number 3?
All right, number 3 is love it or leave it. UTSA head coach Jeff Traylor is a better hire for Texas Tech than SMU head coach Sonny Dykes to replace Matt Wells, who was fired on Monday. Love it or leave it.
Yeah, this is an interesting one for me. I covered Texas Tech when Spike Dykes, Sonny Dykes' father, was the head coach at Texas Tech, and he is a legend at Tech. He was a former assistant to Darrell Royal at Texas, and was folksy and West Texas-y, and Taylor, that stuff matters at Texas Tech. It does. There are certain jobs where you gotta kind of talk and think like the fan base, and I just think Jeff Traylor is the coach on the rise. I think he's a star, and I've thought that for a long time. I thought he absolutely should have been retained by Tom Herman.
Yeah,
He wasn't.
huge mistake in my
Huge mistake.
huge, absolutely.
Because the guy's relentless and he can recruit, he can coach. You don't win 3 state championships in East Texas and have your name on the football stadium in your hometown or the town where you won all those state titles if you can't coach. And what he's done in 2 years at UTSA is phenomenal. He's totally changed the culture. They're 8-0, undefeated. They beat Illinois, the same team that beat Penn State this past weekend. Jeff Traylor, to me, is the next rising star coach in the head coaching ranks, and I think if I'm Kirby Hocutt, the athletic director at Texas Tech, I'm hiring Jeff Traylor, and I'm not saying that because Sonny Dykes is the coach at SMU. And I went to SMU, and I want him to just keep coaching.
Homer take, right? No, I'm
No,
kidding. I'm kidding. I'm
I
kidding.
think Sonny he's done a phenomenal job. And Sonny, he went to TCU, worked under Gary Patterson. He understands the importance of defense, even though he's an offensive-minded head coach. He brought in Garrett Riley, Lincoln Riley's little brother. I think he's shown he's a CEO type head coach who can handle it. He's coached at Cal, SMU. He's done it longer than Jeff Traylor. I just think Jeff Traylor is special, and he would bring so much energy to that program. In addition to his excellent coaching skills, Taylor. So I'm going to love this and say that Jeff Traylor is the better fit. Apologies to the Dykes family. Taylor, how about you?
Man, I hate going 3 for 3 agreeing with you, Chip, sometimes, but I have to love this too. I mean, I've been on the Jeff Traylor bandwagon for a long time. My father-in-law, longtime coach in the state of Texas, he respects Jeff Traylor like nobody's business. I mean, this guy is a special guy. And it's crazy to think. So when you said, his name is on the stadium in I guess it's Gilmer, Texas, right? I believe that's
Yep.
where he was. Yeah. And it's like, okay, that's interesting to hear. But he's 53 right now, and he's been out of the high school coaching game since what, 2015 was it? He hired as part of Charlie's second staff. It's either 2014 or 2015. He's been
Yes.
out of the high school game for that many years, and his name's already on the stadium. That means his name was on the stadium when he was in his like early 40s. That's the type of coach that Jeff Traylor is. I always respected him so much. He does everything right. And I agree with you. I think that, I think it's crazy personally, first of all, before I continue with this, it's crazy that Texas Tech fired Matt Wells, in my opinion, when Texas Tech is 5-3. Sure, it hasn't been, a great situation at Texas Tech, but they're in a position now to go to a bowl game with one more win for the first time since 2017. So I think Texas Tech essentially did was, let's fire this coach before he gets bowl eligible and makes it more difficult for us to fire after that, which I think that's BS. I hate that side of the, college coaching game a lot. And you see it a lot nowadays, since it's a win now mentality that people have. But so, but if they're moving on, then I definitely agree with you that Jeff Traylor, they got to do everything they can to get him. And, he is, as you mentioned, he's going to talk the language. I mean, yeah, he's from East Texas and this is West Texas, but still he's a good old Texas boy that understands the pride, the tradition, and what it takes, in those kind of smaller towns in the state of Texas to be elite and as a coach, but also to put elite teams on the field and to coach them up to their best potential. And he showed that in the high school ranks. He did a great job at Texas. I agree with you. Tom Herman, one of his biggest mistakes was not keeping Jeff Traylor, and he's such an elite recruiter. I mean, I think Jeff Traylor is one of those coaches. If you let him in your house and he sits on the couch and talks to mom and dad, it's going to be tough for mom and dad not to be sold on what he has, what he is selling. So I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to love it and say that Jeff Traylor would be an ideal fit for Texas Tech to replace Matt Wells.
Well, Taylor, it's going to be an interesting week, and we appreciate everybody for listening to the Flagship podcast. If you are not a member at Horns 24/7, we would invite you to be an annual member so that you get access to all the premium content on every site in the 24/7 Sports Network, the preeminent network for college football, college basketball. And if you're not a subscriber to the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, make sure that you're a subscriber there so that you're getting all of our great interviews with Michael Griffin, later this week with David Smoke. And,
And we have the state of recruiting now on video as well. So we have our other two of the three Horns 24/7 podcasts are now on video at the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. Just go youtube.com /Horns 24/7. Click the bell, subscribe, and you'll get all the latest content for both the Flagship and our interviews and our recruiting guys who are, the best duo in Texas football recruiting with Mike Roach and Nick Harris on the state of recruiting.
Yeah, and recruiting is electric right now. It's so exciting. I mean, Arch Manning, you name it. There's still some big fish out there, some big recruits out there, and those guys are all over it. So thanks again so much for listening to the Flagship podcast. Make sure that you're tuned into all the podcasts at 24/7 Sports. For Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. Until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.